As is often the case at this time of the year, you're going to find a lot of people in the property industry predicting what's going to happen in the following year. In other words, what's the trend likely to be in the next 12 months. So as we approach 2022, what is likely to happen? So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I hear people talking about and why I consider those things to be noise. And in fact, it's things that the media have also picked up on, and why I actually think there's a better way of charting that, and I will give you that towards the end of this video. Hi, my name is Jim J. Davidson, and I first invested in property in 1973. I completed my first new build development in 2006. As you can imagine, I've made lots of mistakes along the way, but thankfully I've got some things right, and I've managed to build a property development business. In this channel, I want to help you on your journey and perhaps share some of that knowledge with you. And so through this channel, which I hope you will subscribe to, or through our membership app, which I hope you will join, and incidentally it's free, you can learn a little bit more about building houses and building a property development business. The app is available wherever you get your app from, whether you're on iOS or you have an Android phone, or you can get accesses on desktop, and you'll find a link in the description below. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of this video, and please post your comments in the description below if you have any comments to make. So the first thing that has been in existence over the last 12-18 months was the reduction in stamp duty. Now, the idea of this was to stimulate the house buying process and get people moving in the market. Whether that was actually necessary or not, I kind of debate, because there certainly was a lot of pent-up demand, and I think all the stamp duty was further accelerate that. But it's interesting because the Scottish government and the UK government adopted different policies. And so in the Scottish government, they allowed a stamp duty holiday at the lower ranges, but not significantly at the higher ranges. And in England, these were allowed at the higher ranges, and so therefore there was a stimulation across the property market. Now, as you remember, this was due to end, and at that time the Chancellor extended the stamp duty holiday for a longer period. In Scotland, they made the decision not to do that. So what's kind of interesting is to note what happened in Scotland when the stamp duty holiday ended, which was, I believe, in June. I'm not absolutely sure. So we've gone through in Scotland quite a long period of time where we haven't had that additional benefit of the reduction in stamp duty. And what principally happened is nothing. It didn't have any effect on the market. The demand was still there. Now, I expect this demand not to be as strong, because I believe the real driver was pent-up demand rather than the stamp duty holiday having an effect. And so as this comes to an end in England, which essentially it's come to an end, because unless you've actually gone to purchase a property, then it's ended. But a lot of people are thinking that there's now going to be a huge tail off in the property market due to that. I believe it's not. We are traditionally going to come into a quieter period of the year as we come in towards Christmas, and we will find that as we get into January, February, there'll be movement in the market. Again, generally a little bit quieter until we get into the spring, and then we'll be into fairly much normal cycles. I don't believe we're going to see the property market values reduce. I believe that they're going to go up, maybe not going up quite at the same rate, but historically that is what happens, and I'll explain that a little bit later in this video, because what we're seeing here is nothing that is really abnormal, apart from the fact that we did have a period of time when the market was closed, and it makes sense that that therefore created, and particularly it was closed in a prime market period, which is generally the spring into summer months. So the market was pretty much closed during that period of time. that was when the greatest amount of demand was going to be there. So once you allowed that demand to be released, in other words, you allowed transactions to start again, it was inevitable that there was going to be a huge move in the market and there was going to be pressure there. That pressure then created outbidding outbidding of properties. So we did see an acceleration of property prices during that period of time. The second area is inflation. Now, there's no doubt about it, there is inflation in the economy. There's inflation in the economies around the world. And that is in part due to shortages of materials. And the reason there are shortages is that we shut down pretty much worldwide factories for at least 2 months and perhaps longer. And so therefore there is that additional period of time where production didn't happen. That would then create shortages. But the second part of that is also there has been an uptick in demand. So worldwide there are more expansion of residential properties. There's expansion in business sectors. There's this expansion in infrastructure. And so those factors therefore are creating greater demand. And therefore that is a driver of inflation at the moment because there is limited supply and it is in its basic economics. And anybody who studied economics in school, this is fairly rudimentary economics. However, as the supply becomes more available and is able to meet more demand, you will start to see prices start to fall. And that is certainly the case. From what I'm hearing is that prices in certain areas have fallen. Will they go back to where they were? Probably not. But there is certainly an amount of this inflation which will then taper back as we start to meet demand. But the second part of inflation is what effect will it have on house prices? Well, generally it will push up the prices of house. In fact, what it's actually pushing up is the price of land. And so those prices are going up and they are a result more to do with the land going up in value and the lack of demand. Now, I heard it suggested by another commentator YouTube channel saying that he believed that the price of materials was going up and therefore the price of houses was going up. That is actually a flawed explanation, in all honesty, because the reason that the prices are going up is in the increase in land. All increases in productivity, all economic activity goes into the land. And I've got several other videos on this site where you can actually watch and understand that concept. So, and the reality is that if land has been bought at a certain price and the prices of materials go up and house prices had not gone up, then there would be a severe problem there, because in fact the person or company building that house would have the pressure on their margins, because the material costs would then have to come out of their profitability, because there would therefore be a ceiling on the house price. However, house prices have moved up and that has eased that situation in terms of pressure on costs, and therefore going forward you need to pay particular attention to land costs, because that is the only place where you can extract the right amount of profit. And we always recommend a 25% return on the gross development value, in other words the selling value of the properties that you create, as an absolute minimum. And we go into much more detail about that in terms of therefore, if you buy land without planning, where should that additional money come from? So, but that's for a different video. The third area is interest rates. Now, there was a recent expectation that interest rates with the Bank of England recent meeting that they would rise. I didn't subscribe to that, in all honesty. And I remember actually one of my clients that I'm working with coming back to me after the fact saying, that he had really thought that the values were going up, and that when I had told them that they wouldn't, he was very suspect of whether I was right on the money with that. And I don't say that to boast. I think it's really about understanding the fundamentals here. So traditionally, when particularly if you go back to the 1970s, 1980s, when we had high inflation, that was generally curbed with rising interest rates. So there's always been this concept that, or belief, that as soon as inflation starts to take off, that interest rates will then follow and go in an upward spiral. And so the idea of rising interest rates is to take money out of the economy because it's overheated, and that's why we've got inflation. However, there is a thing about currently where we are with interest rates, and one of the reasons why they have remained so low and it really is a fallout back from the 2008 global financial crisis, because we took on so much debt, and now currently with the COVID crisis, we've taken on an enormous amount of debt. That debt then has to be serviced, and the government are borrowing that money through bonds to service that debt. So if the interest rates go up, then the problem is there's a major problem there for government and therefore the general economy. And that's why the Bank of England are being very watchful of what's happening in the economy, and really looking at inflation, which we talked about just previously, and seeing where inflation really is going. Because there is still an opinion, is inflation a short-term thing, or is it going to be there in the long term? So I think the guide on interest rates is what happens to inflation as we go into perhaps the first half of next year. So if we start to see inflation subside a bit, then I think the pressure to rise interest rates will be much less. If we really start to see inflation take off without productivity gains, then I think we start to then see the potential for interest rate rises. Currently, the difference between the 1970s and 80s was that we had rising inflation without productivity gains. Currently, our economy is going through a huge change, and I think when you look back 10 years from now, you will see such an enormous shake-up of our economy. It's one of these things that happens every 20, 40 years. I would say actually more 40 years. In other words, it's a multi-generational thing. So if you look back to the period starting the late 70s, going into the first half of the 1980s, our economy took a major shift, a major upset in terms of we moved away from manufacturing and moved towards more service industries. And so therefore I think we're very much in that period now where a lot of and some of the problems with that is that some of the political history has been forgotten, and so therefore we are destined to make some of the mistakes going forward again, but also we will see this huge shake-up in our economy, which will change the way that things are being done, which kind of leads me into the next part. So the next thing that we're going to see is change of habits. That's already started to happen. There'll be lots of different pressures that are going to change the way that we do things in general, whether that's in our own personal life or whether that's in terms of businesses. We are going through a fundamental change. And so, for instance, in terms of housing, the way that we look at housing has changed. The pandemic has done that for us. And it's usually when there's an upset in the economy or in a particular industry that you will see change happen. Now, I can think of many situations in my lifetime where this happened. When I was at school, there was a postal strike. And that went on for several months, if my memory serves me correct. The outcome of that was the upsurge in private delivery systems, whether that be like the FedExes, the UPSs of the world. In other words, all these different delivery systems that we now have didn't exist prior to that. It was all down to the post office. So a need was created. How do we solve this problem? Because people don't stand still, and therefore a change happens. Another situation was a bread strike. Now I know from having had convenience stores that one of the things that changed was that people used to buy a loaf of bread from their local store, local shop, every day, and they would actually take a loaf that was maybe only half used, and they would throw that bread out or feed it to the birds or whatever, and they would buy a new loaf each day. Now, of course, these were in the days when loaves only had about 2 or 3 days maximum lifespan, and so it's telling actually that we've got so many preservatives now in bread and things like milk that we can actually buy them and they will last for a week. But nevertheless, the change there was there was a bread strike again going on for several weeks, and people then changed their habits and started to use all of their bread that they had before purchasing another one. Now you might think, well, that's a good change, and certainly as an environmental aspect and in terms of the impact on that, and in terms of not having wastage, it is a very good aspect. For the bread companies, clearly there was a loss of turnover there. And there's many other situations where you can look at, particularly through strike action, where it became very obvious. One of the areas that we lost an industry was our car industry, because and it's much more complicated than that, but part of it was continual strikes and therefore poor quality. What we're saying now is a change in terms of our living accommodation. People found that they were stuck in flats and now wanted to be maybe have open spaces. They maybe want to accommodate a home office so that they can work some period of time at home. Technology has proved to us where we're hesitant to use it, to be using it. So more people are using technology that would have really backed off using it, and therefore there's productivity gains that come from that, because people now don't necessarily have to travel to meetings, so therefore their time is used much more efficiently. And you will see, because of that, people start to then investigate where else can technology happen. And if people pursue and businesses pursue that route, what will happen is that productivity will go up, wages will go up, because productivity goes up, therefore that will then actually be okay, because it just means that people will actually benefit from that and become wealthier. What happened in the 1970s and 80s was that wages went up to compensate for rising prices, but productivity didn't go up, and therefore you had this vicious spiral of rising prices, rising wages, rising prices, rising wages. It was a bad situation if you were employed, because your wages never kept up with inflation. And I can remember a period where you were getting a pay increase every month by a factor, and they introduced a scale of how they would award those pay increases, and so that actually drove the inflation. And it was only when we broke that link and then started to switch our economy and look for productivity that we started to bring inflation under control. So I think the change in people's habits and the change that we do things hopefully will bring productivity, and that's the thing that you need to watch out for more. Now, the benefit as somebody who is involved in property is that particularly if you've got land and you've had that for a little bit of time, those land values will go up, house prices will go up, but eventually it will crash, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. So when will it crash? Well, it's not going to be next year. It's not going to be the year after that. In fact, the prediction is, and it's not my prediction, I follow a lot of experts in this area who have actually mapped out the 18-year cycle. And so currently we are in the second half of the growth phase. And so if you look back to the 18 years, we had 4 years of contraction, then we have 7 years of where the market moves forward. Particularly in the UK, it moves forward in London and then outside the peripheries. Doesn't get a huge amount of activity in the areas outside of that sort of like London bubble area during that first half. And then in the second half, which was about 2019, and I had said previously that Brexit was going to be involved, it was going to be blamed for a downturn. There's a mid-market downturn. We've come through that mid-market downturn, and now we're in the second growth period, and we're in a much stronger growth period for particularly the other regions that didn't benefit from the first growth period. So they start to catch up with some of the increases that were enjoyed by the London and the greater, when I say greater London, I mean more than greater London, but when you start to get out to the peripheries, the like of the Peterboroughs, sort of like going north. So that sort of like hour's drive from London, outside of London, is where benefits during the first cycle the most, and then they still benefit in the second cycle, but less so compared to the rest of the country. So we're pretty much there. We're sort of like coming towards the mid period of the cycle. 2024 to 2026 is when you want to be certainly more cautious. I think you can be fairly confident up to 2024, and then you just need to make sure that if you're borrowing money, that your ratios are you've got stronger equity to the borrowing, so don't over borrow. And then the crash will come, and that's when you want to be in a great position of having a lot of cash. So over the next few years, I would say the best strategy is to build up your cash reserves to be able to take advantage of the crash when it happens. And what will happen is, let's assume it was 2026. It could be extended a bit longer than that, to be honest. But certainly from 2024 is where I would start to be more cautious and then ride it out and see where that goes. But let's just assume that it's 2026. You're going to find that there'll be 2 years where people will hang on to values thinking that they can attain those values, and it will only be after that period, say 2028, where people will have become realistic to what's happening. And in fact, you'll start to hear people saying the property market will never recover. We've seen the end of it, of growth and all of that. And we heard people saying that 2010, 2011, 2012, and indeed beyond that, because unless you were sort of like in the London and that greater London area, you won't have benefited and seen the property market start to rise. It was only starting maybe about 2016, particularly in Scotland and the north of England, you started to see any glimmer of hint that the property market was moving ahead. Yet the mainstream media was telling us that it was going full ahead and that we were in a boom period. Yet for most of the country, they were not experiencing that. So I hope that's given you a different perspective on what might be happening in the property market over the next few years, and give you a bit of confidence in order to grow your property development business. Incidentally, about the 18-year cycle, there's another video on YouTube here that I created some time back. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, then have a look at that. Also, there's other content on our membership site at members.builditandprosper.com. It's free to subscribe to that membership site, so sign up for that. If you like this channel and you haven't already subscribed, then please subscribe. It always helps us. And if you like this video, please like and share and tell others. Until the next video, I wish you well, and I look forward to speaking to you then. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos. then click to watch the next video. Please remember to visit our website at builditandprosper.com to get our app, or click on the button on the YouTube header if you're on desktop.